This episode of Monster Model Review, we have the Honorable Judge George Stephenson, a true staple in the monster model garage kit industry. From the beginning of the hobby with Geometric to today with Blackheart Enterprises, George has been giving us monster lovers and modeling fans awesome pieces of artwork for more than 25 years. I'd like to point out I tried to show most of the model kits he's ever produced, but I know I've missed a number of them. So please enjoy. And now, without further ado, Judge George Stephenson.
My name is George Stephenson. I am the owner of Blackheart Enterprises. To the garage kit hobby, it's Blackheart Models. And I started the company in 2009, and we are a producer of resin busts, life-sized resin bust wall hangers, and then full 360 bust. That's what we do. And it took a little while to get going, but it's been a good run the last 6 years. Each year has been better than the last. But that's who we are, Blackheart Models. Yeah, I was born in 1958, and born into a family. My dad was a huge science fiction fan, reads all kinds of science fiction books. My older brother and older sister were also into science fiction and horror and fantasy. And so as long as I can remember, we watched horror movies, science fiction movies as a family. I remember my dad taking us to the drive-in. We saw King Kong versus Godzilla. We saw Rodan. And it was really kind of a family activity. To watch those kinds of movies. As I got older, my love for horror and science fiction subjects, movies, magazines just grew. And all my life, I've been a fan of that stuff. When I was growing up, there are three things that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a pro football player. I wanted to be a police officer. And I wanted to be a hobby store owner. And the reason I wanted to be a hobby store owner was that we had great hobby stores in our neighborhood. I used to go into those stores, and while I would see the Aurora monster models, I didn't really connect with those except that they were monsters and they were cool. But to me back then, models were too tough to build. Aurora to me was racing cars, slot cars, the old Aurora Thunderjets. And my younger brother and I got into that, and we were into slot cars our whole lives. We were also into comic books, and Aurora used to advertise their monster models in the back of the comic books. Now, we were into Marvel. I don't know, I assume that they advertised in DC Comics as well. But we weren't into DC Comics, we were into Marvel, and so I'd see the models in the back of those, advertised in the comic books, and I thought, wow, those are really cool. But I just wasn't interested in building and painting model kits. And so I was a hobbyist, and I did a lot of painting of racing cars, and some of the stuff that Aurora produced, some of the accessories they produced to go along with the racing sets. But I just wasn't in the models. Throughout high school and college and law school, I remained a serious horror science fiction film fan. And in 1985, I graduated from law school here in St. Paul. And I should mention that something that I always did, wherever I was, if I was driving down the street, walking down the street, whatever, if there was a hobby store, I always went in. I always went in to check out hobby stores. And I had just graduated from law school. This was in early 1985, and I was driving down the street that I had driven down a gazillion times because it was right near the law school. And I see this hobby store sign. And I was like, what? I've never seen that. And so I circled the block, parked in the parking lot, and went in. And the store is called Scale Model Supplies. It's in St. Paul. And you go in and you have to go down these steep steps. And I went down the steps And once you get into the store, the first thing, back then, the way they had it set up, the first thing you see when you get in is a display case. And in that display case were all the Aurora models built and painted, and they were fantastic. And I looked at them, I was like, oh my God, I remember those from when I was a kid. I remember those. And so, during law school, I worked full time and I went to school in the evening. And so now I was done with law school. I had some disposable income because I was working as a prosecutor. I had some spare time because I wasn't going to school at night anymore. And I thought, it'd be kind of fun to pick up one of these monster models and paint one just for the heck of it, something to have in my apartment. And so I noticed that they had a monogram, a Revell monogram Frankenstein model. And so I bought it. That was the first monster model I ever bought. Bought the paint for it, got it home, painted it, had fun doing it. And my roommate was like, man, that's pretty cool looking. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get some more. And so I went back to the store and bought the other Revell kits that they had available. I think they had the Wolfman and they had Dracula. And so I bought those and built those and thought, you know what? I'm gonna try and get the whole set. And so I went back to the store and talked to the store owner and said, hey, I want to get the Bride of Frankenstein, I want to get the King Kong, I want to get this, that. And he was like, well, they don't make this stuff anymore. If you don't see it here, it's because, we can't get it. But there is this little underground network where you can get this stuff. And he said, look over there on that bulletin board. There's a little flyer for a guy in town here who's into that stuff. There's a guy named Terry Ingram. You guys know Terry. Terry is the driving force behind the Universal Monsters Army, which is a pretty nice website, pretty nice organization. Anyway, I contacted him and got information about other folks that might have some of this stuff. John Green out in California, Terry Webb, who was writing for Model and Toy Collector magazine. I think there might have been a couple of other people that he referred me to, and I got in touch with those guys because I was hooked. After three plastic model kits, I was hooked. And I started buying the stuff through mail order, and eventually had all of the main monsters that Aurora had done, all the classic monsters. And then I was like, shoot, I got them all, and now what am I going to do? I want to keep doing this because it's fun. I got in touch with Terry Webb, and he turned me on to some guys that were doing resin kits. He turned me on to Screamin'. I subscribed to Model and Toy Collector magazine and saw Screamin's ad for a Freddy Krueger vinyl model, and I was like, oh my God, Freddy Krueger. Then I found out about Billiken. And then Randy Bowen and Jeff Yeager, and I started buying model kits, Dimensional Design, Danny Sirocco. I started buying kits from these guys. And started building up a collection, having fun painting them. And then I moved to Chicago, and when I was here in Minnesota, I had been a prosecutor. I moved to Chicago to do federal defense work, criminal defense work. And I was there for 2 years, and the roommate that I had here had moved to Chicago too. And he, one night, he came to my apartment, my condo, and we were hanging out. And I'd just gotten 2 resin kits in the mail. I paid probably $100 for each, which back then was a lot of money for a resin kit. No, I didn't pay that much. I paid $75 for one, and it was Randy Bowen's Nosferatu. I paid $100 for the other one. It was Jeff Yeager's Curse of the Werewolf. And I get them, and I look at the Curse of the Werewolf. I'm like, this is an incredible sculpture. But the design of the kit was horrible because you had the upper body that just stuck to the lower body. It didn't socket, and so it required a lot of work to get them to look right together, to get it to fit together. And then the Randy Bowen Nosferatu, which was really nicely designed, just like an old Aurora kit, but the casting was terrible, absolutely terrible. And so when my buddy comes over and says, "Hey, let me see what you got," because he was always excited when I got something new that I was going to work on. I said, "Well, here they are. Here's Curse of the Werewolf. Here's Nosferatu." He goes, "Man, those are awesome." I go, "Man, but look at this. This could have been just an incredible kit, but look how it's designed. The casting is terrible, but the design is good. On this one, the design is terrible, but the casting's good." You know, and he said, "Well, you know, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going to struggle and build them and paint them." I said, "But, you know, shoot, I could design a better kit than this." He goes, "You really think you could?" I said, "Sure. Some of these guys are doing this stuff in their basements, in their garage. I'm a smart enough guy to figure out how to do this." He goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Then let's do it." Well, I should say that we had both been imbibing when we were having this conversation, and neither one of us was all that clear thinking. But all of a sudden there was this seed, and we decided, you know, let's do this. And so Geometric Design was born that night. But what we decided was, we're not just going to do garage kits. We're not just going to do resin kits. We're going to do them with the permission of the studio and the cooperation of the studio to set ourselves apart from what everybody else is doing. And we figured if we did it that way, we could market them, we could advertise better, and maybe sell more and actually make some money at it. Boy, were we naive. So we immediately started pursuing licenses. And I should tell you, this was the guy, he was my first partner. His name was Mark Mattison. Mark's family owns the company Radio Flyer, the company that makes the red wagons. And they founded it, and back in 1988, 89, his family still owned it, and they still own it today. Columbia Pictures was making a movie based on the wagon, a movie called Radio Flyer. And I said, let's see what kind of movies Columbia Pictures has that we might be interested in. And we checked it out. We looked at their film library, and they owned Fright Night, and they owned The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And we thought, oh, hell yes, let's go for that. And so we got these licenses dirt cheap because Columbia Pictures was in love with Radio Flyer, and they were collaborating on this movie. So we got the licenses and then went about trying to, you know, get sculptures made. And boy, we we made some big mistakes to begin with. We hired a guy to sculpt the vampire bat from Fright Night. It was just awful, absolutely awful. He sculpted it in wax. He absolutely did not know what he was doing. And we didn't know what we were doing either, and that's a terrible combination for trying to start off a garage kit business. Then we talked to another sculptor, a guy that you guys know. I won't say his name, but you know who I'm talking about. And we talked to him about sculpting something for us, and he's a big-time sculptor, and he was like, you know, when you have your stuff together, when you know what you're doing and you want somebody who can really sculpt, then you call me. And so I was like, wow, okay, all right. So we continued, you know, kind of networking and trying to make connections and meet people. And by that time, Terry Webb and I had become pen pals and spent a lot of time talking on the phone. There was no internet back then, no email. But hours on the phone just chit-chatting. And he knew what I wanted to do with Geometric. And if you ask Terry, Terry would say that when we started talking, there was something different about me than the gazillion guys who call him up and say, hey, I want to start a garage kit company. I think probably the main thing was that I was a lawyer, but I actually did have a vision of what we were going to do. And so Terry calls me one day and says, hey man, there's this convention coming up. You got to go to it. I said, where? He said, Louisville, Kentucky. It's the Louisville Model and Toy Expo. And there's this model club there that's putting it on. You should go. He said, I'm going. And so I said, okay, well, yeah, this will be a good opportunity to network and get some ideas from guys and see what kind of stuff is being produced, because I still haven't produced a damn thing, haven't gotten a single sculpture in my hand, a workable sculpture. And so my wife and I drove to Louisville. Now, I should tell you, before I was a prosecutor, I was a human rights investigator. And we went to a convention, this is a few years before the Louisville show. We went to a convention in Louisville, and a few days before the convention, this is a human rights convention, right? A few days before the convention, it was revealed in a bunch of news stories that there were Klansmen in the Louisville Police Department. And so years later, I'm driving to Louisville with my wife for this convention, and I've never met Terry Webb. I've never met Mike Parks, who I had also talked to about meeting up in Louisville. He's a sculptor. And as I'm driving, it occurs to me, holy, what am I thinking? You know, look what I look like, and I'm going to Louisville. They used to have Klansmen in the police department, and my wife is a white woman. This may not be the smartest thing to do. But we got there, and it was just phenomenal. The people there were so cool, so accepting and encouraging. And I made a bunch of friends there, but I also made a bunch of friends who were from here. I met Terry Ingram from Universal Monsters Army in person, and a bunch of other hardcore modelers from the Twin Cities. I met them at Louisville. And so got to know Mike Parks, and we decided, you know what, let's collaborate. I need somebody that can sculpt some stuff. You've sculpted some stuff. And then we started working with Mike Parks. He did two of our first kits for us. Within, let's see, so that was August. I'm pretty sure that was August of 1990. Terry Webb calls me up in September and says, hey man, there's another show coming up. This one is in New Jersey. It's called the Horror-thon, which is today Chiller Theater Convention. And he said, you gotta go. This is a big opportunity for you to debut your stuff. And so I'm working with Mike Parks, and I know nothing about mold making. So I'm like, Mike, I need you to not only sculpt these things, I need you to make the molds and produce them for me. And he's like, sure. So, and then I contact John Dennett. I got referred to John Dennett by Terry Webb and commissioned him to do a model kit. So Mike sculpted the Cyclops, and he sculpted Amy from Fright Night. And John Dennett sculpted Our Fiend Without a Face. And Dennett didn't have the space to do molding and casting, so we were on our own finding a way to produce Fiend Without a Face. So by now, I'm back here in the Twin Cities. I'm working for a private law firm and trying to figure out how to make this little hobby enterprise something that's a moneymaker. And I wasn't thinking big time money. I was thinking a couple of $100 here and there, but mainly feed my hobby. And so we found a guy in town who could make molds and do casting for us. And he did. He made the molds and cast, I think, maybe 5 or 6 of the Fiends for us in time for the Horror-thon show. And Mike Parks came to the show, and he brought a few castings. And this was the first convention where we actually participated as a vendor. And it blew our minds. We had all these people come. We had displays. We had an Amy display, we had a Cyclops display, and we had Our Fiend Without a Face. And we sold out within 2 hours. Sold everything we had. and we had people trying to get us to sell our displays. We came there, we didn't even have receipt books. We didn't have change to give people. We had no clue what we were doing. We had no idea the response was going to be what it was. And so we started taking orders. We took a piece of paper and started writing down orders, names and addresses, and collecting money. And we were so busy. My partner and I didn't communicate all that much about what we were doing, except write this name down, make sure you write down what he ordered, that kind of stuff. When the convention closed that evening, we went back to our room. We were dead tired. I mean, dead tired. We're like, man, this was a nightmare. This was an absolute nightmare. And then I said, how much money did you collect? He goes, I don't even know. He starts taking money out of his pockets. I'm like, shoot. I start taking money out of my pockets, and I mean, it's two huge wads, and he had the same. We were like, holy shit. We put the money on the bed, started counting it. We couldn't believe it. I mean, we were laughing our heads off. And we were like, I think we're on to something here. And so that was the first day of the show. The second day of the show, more orders. Now, at the time, I was running geometric out of my apartment. And I had taken out an ad in Model and Toy Collector and had stupidly used my phone number. Within a week of that show, I was getting calls at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning from China, Japan, Australia, from the West Coast at midnight. And I mean, 4 or 5 calls a night. As soon as I'd get home from work, and I was still practicing at the law firm, as soon as I'd get home from work, the phone would start ringing. Actually, it had been ringing all day. I'd have to answer 5, 6 messages on my answering machine. And we just started working it. And I just kind of put my head down and decided, let's make this work. And so we networked, we continued to network, and we worked our butts off. Got in good with some sculptors, figured out what we wanted to do next. Started buying licenses. Columbia Pictures was good to us. I can't remember. I know there was a third one that we got through them, but we went to MGM. Actually, the first license we wanted to get was the Predator. And 20th Century Fox at first was interested, and then for whatever reason decided that the money we were talking about was just not enough. Then we wanted to get Pumpkinhead. That was the second license we wanted to get. And MGM was like, we aren't interested in licensing a product that would have us attached to our studio, attached to a monster that goes around killing teenagers. We're just not into that. And I'm like, but you made the movie and you own it. Let us make a model of it. No, we're just not interested. There's no way we're going to license that. And I said, well, if you ever change your mind, you promise to call me? And she said, we're never going to change our mind about that. But yeah, if we do, I'll call you. Well, so we went ahead and did our thing with Fright Night, with Fiend Without a Face, with Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and then and 6 months passed, and I went back to MGM, and I said, it wasn't even 6 months, it was 3 months. And I said, hey, I called the lady that I had called, and she wasn't there anymore in the licensing department. And so I got the name of the person who had replaced her, and that person, I said, you guys have this movie property called Pumpkinhead. She goes, Pumpkinhead? I go, yeah. I said, it's a horror movie, and we want to do a model of a Pumpkinhead. It'll be cool. And she said, okay, all right. Put together a proposal, and we'll look at it. So, $1,500. And we got the license, and we had Randy Bowen sculpt it. and we submitted photos for MGM's approval, and they're like, look, don't send us that stuff. We, you just go ahead and do your thing, because the lady didn't like the way Pumpkinhead looked. It was scary to her. And then that's when Geometric took off. And we did real well with those, but it was clear that there was going to be a limited market. And it was clear that there were limitations to how fast we could produce them and how many we could produce them. Now, we didn't have a garage where we were doing mold making and resin slinging. We didn't. By that point, we had picked up one more partner, and he worked for an industrial supply company, and he was the manager of their warehouse. And so on Saturday mornings, we'd get into the warehouse and we'd put plastic down on the floor, and we'd drag in jugs of resin in our molds, and we would jam. We'd produce as many pieces as we could on a Saturday. And then we had to clean everything up, erase all evidence that we had ever been there over the weekend. But that's how we did our production. And it was just really a lot of work. It was really difficult. And then I got turned on to Billiken vinyl models. And I don't remember, I think the She Creature was the first one I got from Billiken. Eventually I got the Frankenstein, blew me away, and I thought, this is what we ought to be doing for our stuff. We ought to start producing our stuff in vinyl. And so we started researching vinyl, and found out that it was a lot more involved a process than what we had been doing with resin kits. My partners and I were big fans of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Loved the show. And there were no Star Trek figures, model kits, or action figures on the market. Nothing. And we thought, you know what? As popular as this show is, we could really do some serious damage if we could get the license for Star Trek: The Next Generation. And so my partner said, well, let's go for it. I contact Paramount Pictures and start negotiating with them. And it went so quickly. They wanted a lot of money, but it went quick. We thought it was worth it, and we got the license. And the license allowed us to do the stuff in vinyl. So we kind of put the cart before the horse, because we had no idea how we were going to produce vinyl, but we had a 3-year license and figured we have time to get it going. And so when we got the license, by that time we already had a relationship with some pretty good sculptors: John Dennett, Tom Kuntz, Jeff Yeager, Randy Bowen, Mike Parks. We had worked with all those guys, and we decided we'd go with Tom Kuntz to do our Captain Picard kit, our first Star Trek kit. And so we got Tom going on that, and then we started looking for somebody that could do vinyl production for us. And the next Horror-thon, the show out in New Jersey, came along, but I think that year they changed the name to Chiller Theater. And so my partner and I went to the show. We sold a bunch of kits there. We were doing pretty well. And then Saturday night, when the show closed up, we were hanging around with some of the other guys, looking at their booty, what they had bought at the show that day. And somebody was passing around this vinyl kit, and it was a vinyl kit called the Future Ninja, produced by Max Factory, Custom Craft of Japan. And when it got to me, I looked at it, and people had always said, oh yeah, resin is better than vinyl, because vinyl you can't get really sharp detail, can't get fine detail. Well, I got that kit in my hand. I looked at my partner and said, hey man, look at this. And we were looking at this thing, and if you're familiar with the kit, on the back is an egret, the bird, sculpted right into the sculpture. And the vinyl reproduction of it was so sharp. You could see the threads on his belt, which was a rope. I had never seen anything like it, resin or vinyl. And I said, this is who we're gonna get to do our vinyl, man. This company right here. And so then we started trying to find Max Factory. We had approached Kyoto, They weren't interested. We had approached Billiken. They weren't interested. Our feeling was Max Factory stuff was superior to anybody else that was doing vinyl at the time. So we had trouble locating Max Factory. And so I hired a consultant who just happened to be the brother-in-law of a lawyer friend of mine. And his business was to connect small businesses in the US to small businesses in Japan. And so I said, hey man, Reggie, we need you to do this. We need you to hook us up. Find this company, Max Factory. And I gave him what little information I had. And so he went about his thing trying to find Max Factory. And he finally found him. He called me up one day and said, hey, I found Max Factory. I said, great, have you talked to him? He goes, not yet. I keep calling, but I'm not getting any answers. I said, keep working on it, Reggie. This is who we want to do our stuff. And so a couple of weeks later, he goes, hey, I finally made a connection with Max Factory. And I said, yeah, did you talk to him? Yeah, I did. Did you ask him about working with us? He said, I did. I said, are they willing to do it? No. I said, no? He goes, nope, they're not at all interested. He said, the guy just kind of blew me off. I explained to him that I was representing a model kit company in the United States and that you guys wanted to collaborate with them, subcontract production, and he said, nope, they weren't the least bit interested. I said, keep working on them. Call them again and tell them what we want to do. Tell them that we have a license that allows us to do like 12 characters. And so he called Max Factory back and was having trouble getting a response. Meanwhile, my partners were like, hey man, this license for Star Trek is running. It's been 6 months and we don't have a thing yet. We need to get going. And if we aren't going to get in with Max Factory, we got to find somebody else. And so my partners contacted Pulse Plastics. They're the company that does the Screamin' kits. And I said, no way. Yeah, we can't. We can't use Screamin'. We can't use the company that does Screamin'. Not because they're our competitor. I just wasn't all that impressed with the quality of their large vinyl kits. And so we kept struggling trying to get Max Factory. And my partner started getting frustrated with me because I insisted on trying to get Max Factory until we got an absolute no. Well, finally one day they said, hey, George, look, there's 3 of us in this business. 2 of us want to go with Pulse Plastics. You're the only one that wants to go with Max Factory. We're going to go with Pulse Plastics. And I said, guys, you can't do that. You just can't. You're going to regret it. You're going to regret doing that. They said, we got to. We can't wait any longer. Got off the phone with them. My phone rings. I pick it up. It's Reggie, my guy from Japan. He goes, George, I got great news. I said, what? He goes, I talked to Max. I go, yeah? He goes, Max is actually a guy named Max. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I said, what did he say? He goes, he still does. He said he didn't want to do any work with you until he found out that your license is for Star Trek. He's a Trekkie. They want to work with you. Boom, there we were. I quit practicing law in 1993. And that was about the time our Star Trek license really started to kick. And so we rented a little shop in St. Paul, where we did resin casting. And when we would get the shipments from Japan, we'd sort and bag the pieces and box them and then put them in cartons and ship them to our distributors and all that stuff. And by now, we had distributors. We had several hobby distributors. All over the world, actually. It really happened pretty fast. But what we had told Max Factory was, look, we love the work you do for us. We want to keep working with you, but we really want you to teach us how to do this because we want to be able to do some of the production ourselves in-house. And so we need you to agree to do that. And Max was like, cool, yeah, we'll show you how it's done. And so I went over to Japan a couple of times a year. And when I would go over there, Max gave me the opportunity to go into the vinyl casting company that he worked with. Max Factory didn't do their own production. Like most of the people over there, they farmed that work out to some little shop that had like 2 or 3 guys busting their butts producing stuff, and they were fantastic. And so I got to check it out and actually got to experience pulling vinyl pieces. And they also allowed me to videotape it. And so I videotaped everything and took all kinds of notes, and came back to the US, came back to Minnesota, and contacted some guys who were a special effects company called Minifex. They're here in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. And those guys had taught us some things about mold making, silicone molds and slinging resin, producing resin kits. I went to them and I said, hey, here's our deal. You guys are problem solvers. I got a problem I need you to solve. Here's a video. Take a look at it. This is the production. This is vinyl. This is slush molding that they do in Japan. This is how they're doing our kits. We want to figure out how to do it here. I want our setup to look just like what you see on the video. And so they watched the video, came back a couple of days later. Yeah, we can do that. Can you make the equipment? Oh yeah, we'll custom make it for you. How much is it going to cost? It was a lot less than what folks in Japan had told us it would cost. And so we had them fabricate all the equipment for our own production. And then we started thinking, okay, now how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that kind of production in this little shop that we have? And then our shop got burglarized. Somebody broke in, took our fax machine, took TV, took all of our stuff. Didn't touch any of the product, but they took all of our electronics and stuff, stereo. And we talked to the landlord about tightening up security. And the landlord was like, you're on your own when it comes to that. And we were like, well, then we need to move then. And so we immediately started moving, and we found this spot, just the perfect spot, right off downtown St. Paul. And we got in there and got a good deal on the rent. It was perfect. I mean, just perfect for what we wanted to do. More space than we needed, space that we could grow into. And by the time we got in there, the guys from Minifex who were going to custom make our equipment were ready. The equipment was done. They moved it in. We got it all hooked up. Talked to Max, had him send some of the molds, and then at that point we were ready to go, except we didn't have vinyl. And that was another obstacle that we had to overcome. Fortunately for us, there's a vinyl production company here in town, and we contacted them, took molds over so they could see what it was we wanted to do. And it was kind of a trial and error. They formulated some vinyl samples, and we tried it out, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but we kept tinkering with it until after a year we had the vinyl that we needed. It worked perfectly for every mold that we needed to pour it into. And then boom, we were off and running. Unfortunately, just as we got off and running, the whole hobby industry took a nosedive. Comic book stores started dropping off. Hobby stores started dropping off. Hobby distributors and comic distributors started going away. There were more companies getting into garage kits, and I consider vinyl kits garage kits. And so there was a lot more competition. Seemed to be fewer distribution outlets, and then people were getting into home computers, and then video games, and then action figures came along, and then collectible statues and bootlegging. And this is over the course now of about 10 years, which brings us up to about 2,000 And in 2000, I became the chief prosecutor for the city of St. Paul. I had been dabbling in practicing law while I was running Geometric, so I was just practicing law part-time. And the city of St. Paul asked me to come back to work for them, because I worked for them in the 80s, asked me to come back to work for them, and eventually asked me to be the chief prosecutor for the city. And I said, you know, I really don't want to do this because I got this business. But the money was so good I couldn't pass it up, and Geometric was struggling with the hobby business the way it was. And so I hired a shop manager and an office manager who came in and really were phenomenal. But a business like that, the person with the love for it has to be there. You got to be there all the time. And it hurt me not being there. I had bought my partners out a few years before. And you know, business was struggling. In 2001, Jesse Ventura, Jesse the Body, who was at that time the governor of Minnesota, appointed me to the bench. So I was a judge, and the word came down that our Supreme Court really didn't want me, and our district chief judge really didn't want me operating a business while I was trying to learn how to be a judge. And I understood that, and so I sold the business to one of my distributors, and just kind of walked away from the hobby. That was 2003, and I didn't paint another kit for 6 years.
So what brought you back in then?
That's funny because my girlfriend, who you saw earlier today, who comes to the shows and runs the table with me, I started collecting a bunch of African masks. You guys have seen my wall. It used to be completely covered with African masks. And my girlfriend was talking to me about Geometric, and what she'll tell you is that whenever I would talk about Geometric, I was just so much more alive than when I would talk about anything else. And her feeling was that it was something that I should get back into. And I was like, you know, that's a lot of hard work, and yeah, it would be fun to do that, but I don't know. I don't know. And then I kept in touch with one of the companies that did molding and casting for me, resin casting. When Geometric got busy with the vinyl, we farmed out a lot of our resin casting. And so Mark Brokaw from Earthbound Studios, he and I were really good friends. We'd keep in touch, and he was talking to me, and he said, man, I can't believe you haven't gotten back into this yet. And then Joe Simon, the sculptor who did a lot of pieces for Geometric, he and I kept in touch, and he was like, man, you should really get back into this. We miss you. And one day I got a friend of mine sent me the face of Pumpkinhead. It was just the face, resin casting. Actually, I think it was fiberglass casting. And it was painted. And I thought, you know, it'd be kind of cool to mix that in with all my African masks. People will look at the mask collection and see all these nice works of art, and they'll see the Pumpkinhead face and go, what the hell? And so I put it up there, and then I thought, you know, that looks pretty cool. I'd like to get a couple more monster masks, monster heads to mix in with the collection. And I got a mummy casting from Mike Falsigno. He had done a Boris Karloff mummy head. And I asked him if he could pour it so it was just half the head. And he did. Paid him for it. He sent it to me, and I painted it, and I was like, wow, this is the first thing I've painted in 6 years. Man, this was a blast. I missed this. And then my girlfriend and Joe Simon and Mark Brokaw kept saying, hey, you should do it, you should do it. And so in 2009, the beginning of 2009, I decided, you know what, let me do this. But I'm going to keep it very low key, just do a couple of pieces a year. You know, maybe make a couple of $100 here and there, like I, you know, naively thought I could do with Geometric when we started it. And so I commissioned Joe Simon to do 2 pieces for me. And the first piece was going to be Nosferatu. But when I looked around, when I started looking at what was going on in the hobby, I saw that there were 2 or 3 life-size Nosferatu busts out there, and I thought, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to do something where there's not a lot. And so I looked at what Geometric had done, and I thought, you know what? We had great ideas what to do with Geometric. So let's start walking down that road, but it'll be something that won't be confused with Geometric. So instead of doing figures, 1/6 scale figures, and instead of doing 1/4 scale busts, let's go bigger. Let's do life-sized. And let's not just do busts, let's do them so that they hang on the wall. Because people are running out of shelf space. And plus I got this wall with all these African masks. I want to put some monsters in there. And so boom, wall hangers. And we did Medusa and Mr. Hyde. Those were the first 2. And that was, we debuted at WONDERFEST in May of 2009. And that was really the start of it. One of the cool things about doing Blackheart is the challenge of it. Trying to come up with something that people like and will actually buy. And so when we came out with our first 2 wall hangers, people weren't doing wall hangers. There weren't that many people doing life-size heads of movie monsters. And so I recognized that it was going to be a challenge, but I thought, I think I can get people to get turned on to this. And so we did Medusa, which is a beautiful piece, and we did Mr. Hyde, which is another beautiful piece. And we showed up at that show without a whole lot of fanfare. We hadn't put the word out in advance that we were going to do this, so we surprised a lot of people. And we did okay at the show, but there were a lot of people who were like, man, I don't know about this wall hanger thing. It's like a plaque. And, it's big, and, they're not cheap, $190. And I just thought, I'm just gonna give it some time. And let me do a couple of more pieces that will appeal to some more people. So I need to come out with something a character that people really are passionate about or really dig. So I thought, Terminator, that'd be an easy one to do, and let's do something special. Let's light up his eye. And so we came out with the Terminator. Man, that thing didn't sell. It was so discouraging, and I thought, oh man, maybe this wasn't such a good idea to get back into doing this. And then, but I thought, you know what? I'm gonna give this a year. I'm gonna give it a year. So then we came out with The Thing. And so within 1 year, we had come out with 4 pieces, which was twice as many as I wanted to do per year when I decided to do Blackheart. And The Thing didn't sell well. And I thought, oh man, I got to do something. I mean, I don't want to admit failure yet. Plus, I dig these pieces. I like them. And the people who buy them and do them are really into them. They really dig them. So let me try something else. Let me do another one. And we did The Predator. And when we showed up at WONDERFEST 2010 with The Predator, boom, Blackheart took off. It was a huge leap. And Predator fans just jumped all over it. And that kit really helped establish us and gave me confidence that if we did the right characters and if we did them well and we priced them reasonably, we could sell a few. And the goal was to sell 75 to 100. If I could sell 100, I just quit. I just quit doing that particular character. But with The Predator, I mean, boom, we hit 100 and we kept going. And then Medusa was right there too. Medusa took a little bit longer to hit 100. And then the next thing that really boosted us was the kit builders airbrushing class at WONDERFEST. And so I had approached them about using one of our kits at WONDERFEST 2010, which would have been our second WONDERFEST with Blackheart, but they had already committed to somebody else. So as we were coming up on WONDERFEST 2011, I contacted kit builders and said, hey, would you consider using one of our pieces this year? I'll give you a good deal on it. And they decided, yeah. yeah, we'll do it. And so they took the Thing. They did the Thing, and I think they might also have taken Mr. Hyde. I think they did too. So people who took the class could have their choice. And he must have had 30 people in the class, and just about every one of those 30 people came over to our table and bought another kit at that show. And so we were just blown away by how well we did at that show. And then we decided, shoot, let's do other airbrushing classes at other conventions. And it was really, the class itself wasn't about making money for us, it was about marketing. Because we provided the kits to the class for just a little bit above our cost. The hope was that people in the class, a lot of people were intimidated by 1-to-1 scale. And they're also intimidated by the cost, about $200. And they felt, I can't get 1-to-1, I'm not gonna be able to get a 1-to-1 scale piece to look good. I'm just not that good a painter, and it's gonna be too tough. And my feeling was, that's how I felt before I had ever painted a 1-to-1 scale piece. But after I did it, I was like, wow, that was a lot easier than I thought, and it looks cool as hell. So let me just get people to try it. And so we really pushed to get airbrushing classes at the conventions we went to. And so we went to Monsterpalooza, did an airbrushing class there. We had almost 30 people. Most of those people came over to our table during the show and bought another one. Then we went to WONDERFEST the next year, and then when we ran the class, Kit Builders backed out, and we ran the class, almost 30 people. And then we had people, seeking us out. What's new from Blackheart? What are you doing next? Put me on your mailing list. And then but we weren't hitting the guys on the East Coast. And then Jersey Fest came along, and we talked to them about doing a class. And so we did a class there. We had 36 people in that class. And a lot of those people came over and bought a kit. And so the classes worked perfectly. We didn't make much money on the classes, but it was the marketing, and that was the best money we could have spent for marketing. And that's really what got us going. And now people know who we are. We got people who look forward to the classes. We have people who, are always checking out our website, and,
So you started out doing the wall hangers.
Yep.
What made you go to the 360 product line?
We had a lot of people who just wanted the whole head. And we heard from a lot of people, I really love the Thing you did, or I really love the Medusa or the Mr. Hyde, but man, I'm into busts. I don't have wall space, and I want to get more of the body. And so we thought, okay, well, let's try that. So I think the first full bust we did was Christopher Lee as Dracula. And we did well enough with it, but we continued to have people asking, please do Medusa as a full bust, and do Mr. Hyde as a full bust. And so we figured, let's try and hit both, because we definitely had people who didn't want the full busts. They wanted the wall hangers. And we definitely had people who didn't want the wall hangers and wanted the full bust. So we figured, well, let's see how that'll work. So when we discontinued Medusa, the wall hanger, we figured that's pretty much run its course. It's our best-selling kit still. But let's see what we can do with Medusa 360. Well, we came out with the Medusa 360, boom, that took off. And we realized that we could make money on both versions. The market would support it. And so we've done well with them. This year we're releasing and marketing our first pre-painted bust, and that's Bela Lugosi's Dracula. The Sideshow Collectibles is distributing it for us, and it's a beautiful piece. Jeff Yeager just killed it. It's been a year in the making. We we ran into. I mean, it's kind of funny now. Yeager sculpted the mole on Lugosi's right cheek when it should have been on his left, and it wasn't caught until after approval. And the Lugosi family contacted us and said, "Hey, you know, it's on the wrong cheek, we think, but if you can find some reference with it on the right cheek, you're good." And I checked the reference. I was like, "Nope, we got it on the wrong cheek." And so they asked us if we could remove it. And I talked to Jeff. I said, "Man, how could you do that? How many times have you sculpted Dracula?" He goes, "I used some reference that had been flipped on the internet." And so we had the mole removed, but in looking through the reference, we found that Lugosi had moles. It had 3 moles and not just one, and so we got it right because we wanted to get it right, and the Lugosi family were really cool about it. The second is also sculpted by Jeff Yeager, and it's Nosferatu, the classic Nosferatu, and so I'm getting back to what I wanted our very first bust to be. Waited 6 years to do Nosferatu. And when I talked to Jeff about doing it, I said, "Hey man, look, this is my dream right here. You have to kick ass on this. This sculpture of Nosferatu, this bust, has to be the bust that makes everybody who's thinking about doing a Nosferatu bust say, fuck it, I'm not doing it. Black Hearts is just too good." He did that. And this was so important to me that for the first time, I actually hired a guy to do concept sketches. It's a guy who does work for Sideshow. Amilcar Fong is his name. Guy is excellent, but he's a Nosferatu fan, and he just really nailed it for me. But then we're going to be doing other painted busts. We've got a number of them in mind that we want to do. When I owned Geometric, my partner and I talked about doing something other than figure kits and busts. A monster bust. I actually wanted to do something that might appeal to a different market, a slightly different market, but would also appeal to the garage kit guys. And I thought, a lot of these guys collect magazines, and they collect videos, and they collect books. They buy books and comic books. So all these guys could use bookends. What if we came up with some really cool looking bookends that would appeal to, that would have subjects that they were into? And so I had the idea to do bookends of famous horror, science fiction, fantasy authors. And was all set to get going with it. And my partner just wasn't all that fired up about it. He just didn't think we'd sell that many. And then when I did a little bit more research into bookends are pretty inexpensive. And I thought, it'd be a lot of work to try and sell something, for that low a price, not much of a profit margin. And then my partner, ended up buying him out, and I had other issues, and I just kind of put that on the shelf. And when I started Blackheart, I thought, you know what? It would be cool to go back to that, but not bookends. Let's just do a really cool bust of some of these authors. And I started talking to a local sculptor, Matt Brilliard, who you guys have met at get-togethers here. I talked to Matt, and Matt, as a matter of fact, I met him at a get-together. Did you guys invite him?
No, we met him here.
Okay, because I had not met him. He came here. I had never met him before. I hadn't invited him, but one of the other guys invited him, and of course he was welcome. And he brought some of the stuff he had sculpted, and it turned out he's a big action figure sculptor, done a lot of stuff for Marvel Comics and Toy Biz. Anyway, I'm always looking for new talent, and having somebody local is just a dream. If you can get somebody local who's reliable and talented, oh man, there's nothing better. And so I was talking to Matt, and I thought, let me give him a shot. Let me see what he can do. And so I commissioned him to do the Bram Stoker tribute bust, and I laid out for him what I wanted it to look like. I knew it would go more smoothly with him than a sculptor that used epoxy or clay or super sculpting. Matt sculpts in wax, and so things are a lot more flexible. More, you can move stuff around, and so he was just phenomenal to work with, just fantastic, and his design sense and his ability to sculpt accurately in varying scales, particularly little tiny stuff. I mean, I would go over to see the sculpture in progress, and I'd look at it and I'd just start laughing because it was so good. And but it wore him out. I mean, it was really a labor for him, but man, he kicked ass on that. And there were other authors that I wanted to do. I wanted to do Mary Shelley and Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Rice Burroughs, just a whole bunch of them. And so I got Matt to do H.P. Lovecraft, and then Matt sent a portfolio to Sideshow, and I said, "Look, I got friends at Sideshow." Because I used to work with Sideshow when Geometric was doing vinyl casting. We were testing some of their molds and doing a little bit of production for them. And I said, just drop my name and I'll give them a call. And so I did. I can't even work with Matt now because Sideshow uses them all the time. So I mean, it's been great for him. I love Matt. He's a great sculptor, great guy, good friend, and I'm happy for him. But man, I wish I could get him to do more work for me, because the work he did on the Lovecraft and the Stoker tribute bust, I mean, just top flight. But the idea was that those things would be a little bit different than the thing that the typical modeler would do. I envisioned these things being works of art. And somebody would take a tribute bust and they'd paint it and they'd make it look like a bronze sculpture, and they'd have it sitting in their library, or they'd have it sitting on a shelf using it kind of like a bookend, or they'd have it in an office. And so that was the thinking. And we've done well with those. We've done real well with them. I have the Bram Stoker sitting in my office, sitting in my chambers. I will say something else. A lot of people believe that Blackheart is this much larger business than it is, and they believe that about Geometric too. I used to get calls to Geometric, and can I speak to your customer service department? And sure, hold on. Hello, customer service. And they thought we were this big company, and sometimes people tried to scam us because they thought we were this big corporate conglomerate that would send something out for free to somebody who never ordered it but said that they did, you know what I mean? And I think some people think Blackheart is bigger than it is. Blackheart is me and my daughter, who helps me wrap and pack kits, and my other daughter and my son, who come to shows with me and help sell stuff, and my girlfriend, who does everything and comes up with a lot of ideas, like the t-shirts. Actually, the whole wall hanger idea was actually hers. And then guys who do molding and casting for us, guys who do sculpting for us. We got cheerleaders on Facebook who are great customers, great guys, and really help us out a lot. Painters, guys willing to write articles for the website. I've met some really incredible people and made some really, really good friends. Terry Webb, one of the first people I met in the hobby, and I are still good buddies. David Fisher, who is the editor for Amazing Figure Modeler magazine. I met him at the second WONDERFEST. Actually, it was the first WONDERFEST that they called WONDERFEST, and that would have been in March of 1991. And David came up, and I believe he bought our Teenage Werewolf. That was the first time I met him, and we became friends after that, and now we're close friends. Mark Brokaw in my opinion, probably the best mold maker and caster of resin in this country. He's phenomenal, great work ethic professional. He's one of my best buddies. Sculptors, Jeff Yeager, Joe Simon, painters, Steve Park, Steve Riojas. I mean, a lot of the guys whose names are household names to guys who are really into the hobby and who buy Amazing Figure Modeler magazine are just, good buddies of mine, and we've been good buddies for a long time. I was good buddies with the owners of Screamin' Models. I was buddies with the owner of Horizon, Barry Jones, the owner of Halcyon, Mike Hill. I could just keep going. There's a gazillion names: John Dennett, Tom Coons, Sean Nagel, Tim Bruckner, tons of guys that I've become friends with, who've worked with us, who taught me a lot of stuff, taught me about mold making, taught me about different kinds of resin, different kinds of silicone, and then the people who buy our kits. There's really nothing more gratifying than being at a convention or getting a message from somebody or a photograph from somebody who just loves the piece that they just bought or that they just finished. It's just so cool. The coolest thing on our website to me is the galleries, which have hundreds, if not thousands now, of pictures from customers all over the world who've built and painted our stuff and wanted their picture, their work in our gallery. And that's just cool, just really cool. The conventions are fun. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. I like that people dig our stuff, but it's uncomfortable when somebody's coming up to you and telling you that you're great and all that stuff and telling you how much they love you. Look, I'm just a guy. I'm glad you like my stuff, and I really appreciate you, but sometimes it gets a little bit uncomfortable. But the flip side of that is, I think we have a certain gravitas with people because they know we stand behind our product. They know how hard I work to do this. So it really is kind of a collaboration of all these different people that really make Blackheart this company that is bigger than it really is, you know what I mean? When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, I'm sitting at my computer and I'm answering emails and I'm posting stuff on Facebook and I'm updating the website and I'm checking PayPal and moving money over and I'm paying the bills and I'm shipping out kits. And it's a lot of work, but man, there's nothing more fun than this. Just nothing more fun than this.
I'd like to thank George for taking the time and sharing his story with us and helping keep our favorite hobby alive and flourishing. Check out all the current pieces and upcoming kits at blackheartmodels.com. Thanks to Chris Gerke for helping with production, and to see more artist profiles, reviews, how-tos, and show video, check out monstermodelreview.com. I've been your host, Rob Mattison, and thanks for watching.